Yes, I am a lifelong, yes, I am a lifelong learner. I encourage everybody to do that. In these changing times, we need to learn so that we can stay current. I guess for those of you who attended Pastor Kerwin Webb's presentation this morning, that was a real treat. I like to view that he has provided kind of the inspirational framework and the why civil conversation is important. I'll touch on the why again, but I'm going to move a little past that into a practical space of one, telling you what civil conversation is, how it differs from other forms of communication. And then I'm going to give you some tips on how to do it. And then we will go into breakout groups and you'll get a chance to practice, and each group will have a moderator to kind of help you through that process. So today is an opportunity to learn in an environment, a safe environment. And after the breakout groups, we'll reconvene. We'll hear a short readout from each of the groups as to kind of what maybe they put together. And then Angela will close us out. So in sum, I'm going to again talk about why. And basically it can help us improve our relationships, interpersonal or group. And you can learn how to do it. And I think the key thing, it's really about being respectful. So that's kind of a sub-theme. So why civil conversation? But I got ahead of myself. First, a little more about my roots beyond what Angela said. First, my family. My family was working class, lower middle class, at best in economic terms. My dad was born in Italy. So family conversations could be loud and full of emotion, even anger. I learned that expressing anger was a way to communicate to others that you did not like what was said or done, with the expectation that your anger would motivate a change on their part. This may have worked to some degree within this cultural context, but I learned later in life the hard way, for example, in a business environment, that expressing anger was looked down upon and was considered a sign of weakness, namely that you just couldn't control your emotions. I'm not arguing against expressing your emotions. Rather, I am suggesting that there are times and places that this may not be the most effective way to lead to a better outcome for you. Secondly, the Brooklyn that I knew was known for being loud and a bit crude, rather than for the use of polite or sophisticated language. I think the only big word that I knew before I went to college was delicatessen. My community, the neighborhood, was quite diverse, as Angela mentioned. My neighborhood, my block, was primarily Irish Catholic. But I went to public schools with mostly Jewish kids and a few Black kids. I developed many good relations there. So I learned in the schoolyards, I was not taught it, but I learned it, that I liked some kids from this group and I didn't like some kids from this group, just like any other group. Namely, I learned to judge people as individuals, not as members of any particular group, i.e. I did not stereotype. For this, I'm eternally grateful. And this experience made it easier for me to become comfortable with other groups that I encountered as I moved around later in life. I will say this was not the case for many of my Roman Catholic school attending friends who did not have exposure to Jews or Blacks, and it kept them from becoming more tolerant of others. So I am a strong advocate of diversity as an inoculation against intolerance. And I am pleased to see that Brookdale is increasing its attention to diversity and inclusion. Shifting now to the topic at hand, civil conversation. I will probably use the term civil conversation, civil discourse, and dialogue interchangeably, as I have these, so bear with me on that. My focus will be on its use in a group setting, as this is where the bulk of my experience lies. But most of the guidelines that I will share can be applied to one-on-one conversations, enabling interpersonal relationships to be improved, maybe even repaired. I liken it to do-it-yourself marriage counseling, but in some cases it may be wise to recruit a facilitator. Lots of these tips are common sense, but as fallible humans, we need to be reminded or sometimes hit over the head. Civil conversation requires discipline and self-control to overcome your initial knee-jerk reaction of anger over what you might have heard. It may feel good or right to respond as such, but is not likely the most effective way to make things better for you, likely only worse. So we will have a spiral downhill. There are also some non-obvious tips that I have learned along the way. It takes commitment and practice to master this challenging art. I continue to learn and get better at it, and I continue to make mistakes, some of which I will share with you. There's no need for you to absorb or remember the list of suggestions that I will present. There will be no exam, but hopefully you can find a thing or two on this menu that suits you. Let me offer another analogy based on my life experience. Conducting civil conversation is kind of like raising kids. First, it's not easy, and it's full of unexpected challenges. As a parent, if you don't know what to do in a situation, you can get frustrated. And frustration can lead you to deal with the situation ineffectively at best, or in a destructive manner at worst. But if you can learn some tips, you can better be prepared for the next time. Okay, good. So let me start with a quote from Martin Luther King that I think expresses the rationale of my presentation just brilliantly. I am convinced that men hate each other because they fear each other. They fear each other because they don't know each other. And they don't know each other because they don't communicate with each other. And they don't communicate with each other because they are separated from each other. In sum, separation and lack of communication leads to fear, which leads to hate. I'm going to add a preamble and a post to this statement. Lack of personal relationships is also very important. And I will suggest that even if you are not physically separated, and even if you communicate occasionally, if you don't develop a personal relationship with those who are different, we really don't get to know each other very well. So I want to emphasize the importance of relationship. And lastly, I will append to Martin Luther King's statement that hate leads to the potential for violence. So why civil conversation? Here we have an image of two people who I guess did not engage in civil conversation. They look pretty pissed off to me. Instead of that, we could have this. We could have two people sitting calmly at a table, sharing and learning from each other. And in a group setting, we have a dust up from a Simpsons episode. Or we can have this, where you can see we have a disciplined process, diverse people trying to solve a complex problem, each bringing their own perspective. As we heard today, you get better solutions when you have people with diverse backgrounds and experiences. And if you just look at this slide, can you feel the difference between the civil half of the side and the non-civil half of the side? It sure feels a lot better to me. And we really want to avoid violence. The first photo honors the victims at the Tree of Life Synagogue in 2018 in Pittsburgh. And the second picture is a photo of the civil unrest in Charlottesville in 2017. If you're not aware, hate crimes have been increasing in America. The 2020 FBI crime report documented a 25% increase in race-based violence, including 43% targeting Blacks, 53% anti-Asian, almost 20% against individuals on the basis of their gender identity. The report adds, behind every one of these crimes, 7,000 in 2020, that's about 20 a day, there is a victim of violence, intimidation, or vandalism targeted for no other reason than the perceived membership in an identity group. Bias-motivated crimes tear at the fabric of communities, and members of targeted groups will live in fear for their safety. Isolated incidents can result in community tension and possibly broader expressions of anger and even violence. This is not the America that I want to live in. And Pastor Kerwin today said, as I will reiterate, only constructive dialogue can help us get through the societal excuse me, tumult that we are experiencing. So dialogue is an important answer. So civil conversation is not, it's not about using politically correct terminology. I'll come back to this in a minute. It's not about trying to reach an agreement. It's okay to agree to disagree, just do it civilly. It's not a debate that you are trying to win, especially not about trying to convince others that they are wrong. Excuse me. So let me get back to the use of politically correct terminology. I'll share a recent faux pas on my part. I was presenting a personal story about what I learned about race in America through the course of my life. It was to a mixed racial audience. I got to the point where I got hung up on whether to use the term Black or African American. A brain freeze or maybe a senior moment. But in any event, the anxiety caused me to blurt out the term Negro. A term, excuse me, a term I probably haven't used in 20 years. But it sure came out then. So I kind of waited for a moment for a negative reaction. None came. The point here is there's a lesson for the listener. If you hear a term that isn't necessarily the one that you would like to hear, don't take this as an opportunity to use a brickbat against the person who is the offender. You stand the chance of alienating a potential ally. Rather, turn it into a teachable moment, firmly and gently suggest that that term is potentially offensive to you. Ideally, even do it in private. Lastly, I think if you're sincere, people will see what's in your heart, and it's more important than the proper use of words. Civil conversation is an intentional, focused exchange on a chosen topic, often one of sensitive nature that you want to drill down on. So it may be wise or even necessary to have a neutral moderator to remind everybody of the rules that they're supposed to abide to. And if things get a little emotional, to help dampen the tension. It's really about learning from varied backgrounds and experience. If you do learn from others, you can adjust your own assumptions and opinions. You will grow. This increased awareness leads to empathy for others. And again, as I said earlier, it's mainly about treating each other with respect. And as Pastor Kerwin expressed nicely today, dialogue is requires a combination of intellectual curiosity and empathetic listening. Very nice. Speaking. First few are very common sense, but again, we violate this all the time, only one person at a time, and be brief, don't go on a rant, and make one point, give everybody a chance to express themselves. Address the issue, not individuals, i.e. don't say, you can say, I didn't agree with that point, not I think you're a fool. Speak from a personal, not a group perspective. This is an important one, I think I see violated all the time. In general, no one has authorized you to speak for a group. And typically, in most any group, there's a huge variation of opinion. Your opinion is not necessarily the group opinion. And by speaking for the group, you may be propagating stereotypes. Use I language and not you language. This is one that I only learned within the last few years. Let me demonstrate by example. If I go, why do you people think, why do you people say, why do you people believe? You can see that that can generate a defensive or an angry response. That's not how we get there. Rather, you want to use I language, which might be something more like this. I am under the impression, I heard, I read, I interpreted your comment as such. Please help me understand. So that the you language gives you a spiral downward, and using I language can help bring the conversation up a notch. Second important point about the use of I language is if you language usually implies you're actually asserting what you believe already. And if you hear something that's counter to what you just said, you have to basically eat crow and acknowledge that you were wrong, or more likely you're just not going to be listening. If you say something like I read or I heard, and then somebody says something, you're much more apt to consider that and possibly even change your attitude. I don't know if you can feel the difference, but you said, or I think, really has a whole lot of difference in terms of keeping the temperature down. Lastly, is more express yourself with interest, caring, and humility. Again, respectful attitude is more important than words. And listening guidelines. So about listening. Dialogue is much more about listening than speaking. And again, God gave us 2 ears and only 1 mouth. Good listening enables learning and empathy. Some specific guidelines and tips. Listen deeply, not think about what you will say. Avoid eye rolls and groans. It can feel disrespectful. Now, again, I'll harken back to my roots where expressing your emotions to what you were hearing was actually part of the process. You wanted to make sure people knew how you felt. But I will suggest that some body language comes across as disrespectful. So avoid eye rolls and groans. And again, as I said earlier, respond with grace if imperfect language is used. Summing up, the objective is to help us better understand and transcend differences, develop empathy and inoculation against fear and ignorance, help us create, maintain, and restore healthy relationships, Might even find some common ground or new ideas. Be kind, cut each other some slack if comments are bothersome. Remember that it's mostly about respect for each other. I'll add one. Let me come back to the point about relationships. It's not just about communications. I'll share again another personal story. As when I grew up, it was not unusual to be homophobic. I certainly was homophobic for a good chunk of my life. Then I moved into a neighborhood, and my upstairs neighbor happened to be an openly gay fellow. We got to know each other. I got to like him. Poof, through that relationship, my homophobia was gone. So again, relationships are key. And lastly, I think a point from Pastor Kerwin today. We may need to get out of our personal comfort zone in order to create more comfort within our society. And if we do create more comfort in our society, certainly each one of us will benefit from that. I'd like to add one more point based on what I heard this morning. There was a question asked of Pastor Kerwin. What happens if you're trying to engage somebody in civil conversation that has no interest in being civil or has no interest in conversation? And he definitely and wisely suggested that those are not the people who you want to try to engage in civil conversation. However, there's a little, I'd like to emphasize who you want to have civil conversation with and why. I'll draw an experience from Northern Ireland. There were decades of violence between two different communities, the Protestant and the Catholic communities, and a lot of other differences, but we'll summarize it that way. And through a dialogue process where enough people on each side actually got to know each other, because before that they were really physically separated, created an inoculation within that community, much like a pandemic is. And before those communications where people got to know each other a little bit, if one person on one side, an extremist, basically said, Joe Blow did this, let's get even, in the past, that would motivate other people to get involved, and you would have a violent scenario. After people got to know each other, the response tended to be much more like this: oh, you're just making trouble, leave me alone, we're not following you. So after that dialogue process where a lot of people got to know each other across the groups, the troubles in Northern Ireland really went from a serious violence to I'll say very sporadic violence. So in short, focus on bringing more people into the conversation so that the extremists amongst us are, are diminished. Excuse me. I'm almost done, which is good because my voice is almost done. So we have a choice. On one side, we have the vicious downhill spiral as suggested in Martin Luther King's quote, no communication, separation leads to ignorance and fear, demonization and hate, potential for violence. Or we can have an upward spiral, and here we're going to read from the bottom. We become connected with civil communication. We develop an awareness and empathy for each other. We develop relationships, which creates respect, and we have a more peaceful world. So that ends my presentation. Now we'll introduce you to the process for you to practice. Again, I apologize for my coughing. So you're going to have two questions. The first question is to share about a first interaction that you had with someone who was different. Describe how you felt. How did the encounter go? Did you learn or unlearn anything? Did this encounter leave an impression? Did the experience open you up to learn more? Key point is don't feel constrained by these particular questions. Each of you can look at these questions and say, I have a particular experience that I want to share, and then you write that down. And then after you write it down, you'll get a chance to share what you learned within the group. And then we will go to you'll go to the second question at the discretion of the moderator when you move from topic 1 to topic 2. Topic 2, I want to introduce, this is the scenario I'd like you to follow. Imagine that your class or your school or your place of work had an unpleasant experience with intolerance. So an anti-bullying activist was invited to come and speak to her. Her name is Harnaam Kaur. First, I'll introduce you to her. She was born in England in 1990 into a traditional Punjabi immigrant family from either India or Pakistan. As a young girl, her appearance was quite normal. However, in her teen years, she was diagnosed with a rare condition, polycystic ovary syndrome, which caused her to develop thick facial hairs. This unusual change to her appearance led to interpersonal difficulties. In her own words, I have been body shamed. I have confronted severe bullying, which led me to become very suicidal. It's important that we realize the devastating impact that you can have when you treat each other with disdain or lack of respect. This is only magnified if a group goes after such a person. However, Harnaam, I can say, has transcended, and she's now a successful fashion model and serves as a role model for those who are mistreated because of differences. Some of her quotes: my fight as a bearded woman has been beautifully difficult. I have faced many defeats, but I have never been defeated. My body, my rules is the mantra that I live by. I would say that my haters motivate me. They make me realize how much lack of knowledge there is about people that are different. Because of their ignorance, I want to keep pushing forward and educating people. Lastly, I know that a lot of people feel threatened by me and my stance. I'm an Indian woman. I'm a woman of color. I have a turban. I have a beard. And I think because my voice is so powerful, people forget that I still feel threatened. So now that you've been introduced to Harnaam, I imagine you might have some questions for her. She's been gracious enough to say, I'll answer any question that you have. So after you finish topic 1, go to construct a couple of questions for Harnaam and then share them within your group. And then the group can together look and see if those questions are framed consistent with the civil dialogue rules we suggested earlier, or the group can work together to try to make them better. And then maybe you could look at the before and after phraseology and you can see, yeah, we learned something here. Okay, so Angela will now create the Zoom breakout groups.
The breakout groups, Joe, are already created.
Okay, and so you can stop the recording. And
so Sarah has a question in the chat. Sarah, do you want to, for me? No, Sarah, I don't believe so. All right. So Joe, are you ready for breakout rooms to be opened?
Yeah.
All right. So moderators, you are already assigned to your breakout rooms. In each breakout room, we have 5 breakouts. There are about 7 to 8 people in each room. And just a reminder that breakout rooms are private. They are not recorded. And breakout rooms are opening now. You should get an invite on your screen that says you've been invited to join breakout room, Cynthia's breakout room or Ashley's. Ave's, Sarah's, or Stevie's, please accept the invitation to participate.
And Angela, I guess at 3:05 or so, you can give people a 5-minute warning.
Will do, and I'll also send a broadcast.
Okay, good.
And I'm going to pause the recording now.
Uncomfortable that way.
Thank you for this. Thank you for sharing these testimonies. I'll hold it here for the other groups, Ashley and Sarah, Cynthia and Stevie. You could either, yeah, Sarah, I saw you unmute.
Or I can share maybe a theme for our group. A lot of us shared experiences when we were younger, and meeting people of different religion or ethnicity or race, and being curious, and the inclination was to befriend, or there was sort of a natural human connection that did not put up a wall, but as we get older, for various reasons, walls seem to go up, or what seems segregation occurs in these various ways. And we had a little bit of a conversation of, wouldn't it be great if there was a bit more direct instruction on things like, empathy and relationship building and diversity when we were young, as part of curriculum that kind of armed us and, allowed us to do well as we were aging through developmental stages, but brought with us the kindness, the want for the connection, and the curiosity that we saw as we were younger.
Thank you for sharing this collective testimony. So we can hold it here to get some, we have Ashley. Tell us.
Hey, hello everyone. So in our, when we shared our personal stories, and then also when we were thinking of questions for Harnaam, these were some of the kind of themes that came up. A few of us had stories and personal experiences where they went into it not being unsure, and kind of just realized and went into it with this idea of, I don't know, and to take it as an opportunity to learn from the person and ask questions. Another thing that came up was how civil conversations with strangers can sometimes actually be easier in terms of maintaining composure. We said because in all of us, we had stories where we had family members that were uncivil, or friends who were uncivil, or reacted to people who are different in really negative ways. And we said how difficult it is to have a civil conversation with those who are closest to us, because we tend to get more emotional and we're more attached to those people. And then our last just kind of main takeaway was how this whole experience and everything that we talked about in our room, sharing our stories, really supported the idea that Joe brought up at the beginning, that if we know each other, we will appreciate each other. We see each other as people, rather than just a stereotype or an other, right? So those are some of our main takeaways.
Thank you for this collective share. I'll hold it here for Cynthia or Stevie.
I don't have that much different, but some people had very different kinds of experiences. For instance, in one case, there was a family that did not approve of her background. That seems to be one of the most difficult that was shared, and how she overcame it. But we talked about a lot of different kinds of differences, being gay, color differences. I would say all in all, we were really able to surface a lot of different kinds of differences. And I would say an assessment of my group is everybody was really thoughtful and did not ask contentious questions or bring up anything that was that was wrong or bad or negative. And that's a pleasure. It's really a pleasure for me to be able to jump down or up, jump to a level where a whole group of people can just get together and share these experiences. I would give anything to have more time to do it.
Thank you, Stevie, for that testimony. Cynthia, anything you'd like to share with us?
Yes, I think our group, they shared experiences initially about meeting someone who appeared different. And I think what I learned was that they developed relationships with these people, friendships, and they, you know, were able to learn something new about them, which is very positive, which reinforces Joe's suggestions. And when we talked about Harnaam Kaur, I liked some of the questions that were posed. One of them was, you know, asking Harnaam how she would want people to approach her to ask her questions. Like, what would be the best way to ask someone who has some differences, how they would want to be, how they want people to ask questions to them. Another good suggestion was to ask a person when you're not sure about their gender or how they identify themselves, to ask them, you know, what pronouns do they use, so that you're correctly addressing them in the future. So I thought those were great pointers. We were also talking about names, when our names are different or when they are gender neutral, whether that's good or bad. But and a little bit about bullying when we're all growing up. And I thought we had a very nice, positive discussion where we learned from each other.
So it can be
All
done.
right.
Civil
It can be
conversation
done.
can be done. Good.
Joe, any final last words, any context for this pledge before I close out with our Civility Week questions?
Well, I got a sense that the groups were able to comfortably communicate. So even that to me is a good sign. I think if people know what they're trying to do, it actually helps. So sometimes just having some rules gets people in the right frame of mind without needing to then beat them over the head with it. So that's a good thing. I would like to respond to one of the comments. I think if I share my screen. So somebody asked the question about knowing when to challenge when you hear bad, somebody say something offensive about another group. So this is the product of the New Jersey Interfaith Coalition, njifc.org. And there's a pledge that you can sign online, which goes something like this. If I hear hateful comments from anyone about members of any other community, I pledge to stand up for the other and speak up to challenge bigotry in any form. So the point of this is not to go to a KKK meeting, and if somebody is saying something negative about Blacks, that's not the place to speak up, because you might get yourself killed. But when you're within your own friends, and if you use some of the tips that you just learned about how to present things civilly and use it as a teachable moment, we have the opportunity to kind of at least dampen some of the negativity within our own churches, our own friends. So speak up within your own community if you hear somebody, and it takes a little courage, but again, with a little practice, we get better at it. And again, if you use some of the civil dialogue tips, you're more apt to do it in a way that is effective. So that's one other comment I have. Maybe we could open it up just for any general, we have a few more minutes. If we have any, Angela, is there anything else you want to do, or do you want to let the?
No, I'm just going to go into the Civility Week space. I just wanted to add one note that I hope, like what I'm taking away is the idea of recognizing community, like within your own community. So there is no other, right? So we could extend what our community is, so we could extend and erase whatever invisible boundaries we have or impose of each other. So there is, to the point where there is no other, there is just us and there is just we. So I'm going to drop a question in the chat and I'm going to ask, these are our debrief questions for Civility Week. The first one is, what did you learn from this session that challenged what you thought you knew? So I encourage everyone to answer, just drop it in the chat. You know, you could relieve yourself of the pressure of having to unmute, relieving yourself, keep your camera off. It's all right. So I'm going to ask everyone, what bubbles up for you with this? What did you learn from this session that challenged what you thought you knew? So I'm going to hold it here and leave space for responses. And if some people prefer, Isabel, do you have your hands up to answer this question? If you feel more comfortable unmuting, please do. Welcome.
Yes, I just had a quick question because this is a kind of broad, but on an individual basis, I was in a situation not too long ago where I was in a cousin's house. So I'm in someone else's house. They're entertaining me after a wedding with a group of people. One of my cousins is kind of like a redneck kind of guy, and he used the N-word. It was very offensive, and I was so shocked. I just stood there. I didn't know what to say. And I turned around, then I had a younger niece who came, and she has 2 kids, and she just said, oh, no, 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 no. I don't want my children to hear this. So it was awkward because you're in someone else's house. How would you recommend handling situations like that?
I'm going to jump in here real quick for that. It doesn't, yeah, no, that's all right. You handle it the way you know you should, right? So I think for us to feel that we are not obligated or we don't have permission or it is not our place to say anything, that editing space is what stops us from intervening all the time. So what stops us from intervening is, I'm not in a position of power, or I'm scared of retribution, or this is a person of authority, or this is not my house, or this is not my family, and this is not my place. So these gray areas, when we allow permission for gray area to sort of silence responses that we know we should have, that is a domino effect that'll serve no good. So I do believe you answered your own question. It doesn't matter whose house it is, you are witness to something and you have it within your power and you have the opportunity of proximity because you are there, you are in that space for you to respond to it. And also I just want to, I'm trying to take note. So I hope that answers your question a little bit. But thank you for bringing it here.
Yeah.
Thank you for bringing it here.
Let me add one other point, which
Sure.
is, again, if you use I language rather than you language, you could say, you know, that term offends me, or I would rather not. So don't say, don't make the comment directed at the person, but how you feel about it. You're allowed to express your feelings gently.
All right.
Thank you.
So here's my next question. Where do you see yourself in the stories shared during this session? You could just drop it in the chat. Where do you see yourself in the stories shared during this session? And stories might mean ideas or concepts. Where do you see yourself in these concepts shared during the session? Or where do you see yourself in these struggles shared during this session? So I'm going to hold it here. Thank you for all these beautiful shares. I'm going to answer that question again.
The responses in the chat are great, so I hope
Are
everybody's
beautiful.
looking at them.
Beautiful, beautiful. And you know what? I might even, I even have a note that I'm gonna share with Isabel, because this is my house, right? This is a house. This Zoom call is a house. So, you know, even tempering our language and the language that we use to describe even folk that we might think of as the aggressor. to watch our language and what we use in describing them too. So I just wanted to name that. So thank you for all these beautiful testimonies. And let me see, I have one more question for all of you. This is beautiful. What are you still curious about? I'm going to drop it in the chat. What are you still curious about? What are you still curious about? What are you still curious about? Just drop it in the chat. Mhm. What are you all still curious about? We had our opening keynote. We had this very different experiential piece led by Joe Ritacco. We have a whole week. And really the point of the week is that it's not contained to a week, right? But it's meant to create a culture, a protocol, a way of being. Thank you for these testimonies. I'm just take inventory. Mm-hmm.
Somebody just raised a question about our politicians getting engaged in civil discourse.
Mm-hmm.
I just saw an announcement that Monmouth University is going to have a series of events where Republican and Democratic politicians are going to come together and try to do that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I guess as you could find it on their website. I don't think I can find it quick enough to share it.
Mm-hmm. All right. All right. I hope we can save. I'm going to do my best to save this chat. A lot of important testimony. Oh, we have some links.
Sarah just put that link in, so it was great. Thank you, Sarah.
Wonderful. Anyone could click on the links that are shared in the chat. We're not sharing out the chat. Just you could click on the links and it'll open up into another window and you'll have it for each other. Thank you so much for everyone joining us. We had their Civility Week, a week-long series of events that's meant to inform and create a space for these hard, necessary conversations. Uncomfortability is the fertile ground for growth. Take a breath. Take a deep breath in with and for each other. Hold on to what you shared with and for each other. And on behalf of Brookdale Community College, I want to thank Joe Ritacco. Thank you for everything that you shared. And thank you for crafting a space for all of us to be in these practice sessions for each other, to build our stamina and to build our steel. And I hope to carry that work through it. So I hope to continue working. I know all of Brookdale hopes to continue working with and learning more about Monmouth Center for World Religions and Ethical Thought. Thank you for everyone being here. Thank you so much.
Right.
Take good care. Thank you.
Keep on learning, keep on practicing.
Yes, keep on practicing.
Keep on keeping on, right?
Thank you. Practice. I learned one thing from my own mentors. Practice is training and training is practice. Take care, everyone. Take care, Brookdale. Take care, community. Take care, students. I'll be the last one to sign off. I just want to make sure everybody's all right. Thank you all. Thank you all.